The beginning of a quiet exchange. The hall was filled with soft light, the kind of light that made every face look calmer than it really was. It was a quiet evening, yet the silence carried weight. Many people were seated, waiting for Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella to arrive. There was a sense of anticipation, not for speeches or big announcements, but for something deeper. Sundar had flown in that morning, his mind heavy with memories of his mother, Lakhmi Pichai. He often carried her words inside him like a compass. But this evening, he knew those words might mean something not just to him, but to everyone in the room. When Satya entered, the two greeted each other with warmth. There was respect between them, born not from competition, but from an understanding of what it meant to rise from simple beginnings and hold great responsibilities. In the back of the room, unnoticed at first, Lakhmi Pichai sat quietly. Her presence did not demand attention, but it carried a force stronger than words. She was not there to claim importance. She was there to remind her son of the roots that kept him grounded. The first moments passed with polite introductions. Yet beneath the smiles, both Sundar and Satya carried silent conflicts. Sundar worried that in the noise of success, the lessons of humility might be forgotten. Satya, on the other hand, felt the burden of leadership where every decision could affect millions of lives. The room seemed to sense these invisible struggles. Then, without warning, Lakhmi's soft voice broke the silence. "Both of you," she said gently, "do not forget that power without kindness is hollow. Success without humility leaves no light behind." The room stilled. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. Even Satya, who had heard countless leaders speak in polished tones, felt something stir inside him. For Sundar, it was like hearing the voice of his childhood. He remembered the nights when his mother would remind him that no matter how far he went, he must always walk with respect in his heart. He looked at Satya and saw the same realization reflected in his eyes. This was not just a mother speaking to her son. It was a reminder for every person in that hall and for anyone who might one day hear this story. As the moments stretched, a quiet tension formed. Some in the audience felt uneasy because the truth often touches the wounds people hide. Others felt comfort, like being seen for the first time. Sundar and Satya both leaned forward, not out of obligation, but because they understood this was no ordinary exchange. Then came the twist. Lakhmi looked at Sundar, her eyes full of both love and firmness. "You have been given a voice," she said. "But remember, it is not your voice alone. It carries the hopes of those who cannot speak. When you lead for them." Sundar felt his chest tighten. He realized that leadership was not about being celebrated, but about carrying the weight of millions of silent dreams. Satya nodded slowly, his own thoughts racing. He remembered his own struggles, the challenges of balancing personal life with the demands of being a global leader. He thought of times when he had felt isolated in decision-making. Yet here was a reminder that true strength came not from standing above others, but from standing with them. The room, which had been heavy with silence, now filled with something else. An unspoken connection. The quiet exchange between a mother, her son, and a friend had shifted the atmosphere. It was no longer about titles or roles. It was about humanity, about the fragile yet powerful thread that binds us all together. People would later say that this moment changed how they saw leadership. They would speak about the simplicity of the words and how they cut deeper than the most polished speeches. Sundar and Satya themselves would carry these words forward, repeating them not for credit, but because they knew others needed to hear them. The evening ended with no applause, no loud cheers, only a stillness that lingered long after the chairs were empty. It was the kind of stillness that comes when the heart is touched in a way it cannot forget. And so, the quiet exchange began, a story not about wealth, power, or fame, but about humility, respect, resilience, and kindness. A story that would travel far beyond that room, inspiring millions who longed for hope in a world that often forgets the value of simple truths. The weight of silence the next morning began with a silence that was louder than any voice. Sundar sat alone by the window of his hotel room, watching the city wake up. Cars moved in slow streams, people hurried to work, but inside him there was no hurry. His mother's words from the evening before kept echoing, not like a gentle whisper, but like a bell that refused to fade. He thought of the many stages he had stood on, the many microphones he had spoken into, and the countless faces who had looked to him for answers. He realized that every word he spoke had the power to heal or hurt, to lift or break. The weight of this truth pressed down on him. He felt a quiet fear. What if he failed to carry this responsibility with the humility his mother reminded him of? At the same time, across the city, Satya was lost in his own thoughts. He was known for calmness, for steady leadership, yet inside him there were storms no one else could see. He thought of the long nights when he doubted himself, when decisions felt too heavy, when he wondered if he was truly enough. He remembered how, just the evening before, Lakhmi's words had touched something fragile inside him. They had reminded him that leadership was not about perfection, but about kindness. As the two men carried their thoughts, Lakhmi sat quietly in her own room. She had seen the world change around her, yet she knew that the essence of life never changed. Respect, humility, and resilience. These were the threads that kept families strong and kept leaders from losing their way. She prayed silently, not for her son's success, but for his strength to remain grounded when success tried to pull him away. Later that day, Sundar and Satya met again. The air between them felt heavier than before. Sundar spoke first, his voice low but steady. "My mother's words last night. They made me think. Sometimes I fear I forget what truly matters." Satya nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "We all forget. We chase numbers, goals, recognition. And then someone reminds us that without kindness, none of it means anything." For a moment, they sat in silence, two men carrying the same invisible weight. Then Sundar asked a question that surprised even himself. "Satya, do you ever feel alone, even when surrounded by people?" Satya looked at him, and his expression softened. "More often than anyone knows," he said. "But maybe loneliness is what teaches us the value of connection. It forces us to listen when someone like your mother speaks." Those words pierced Sundar deeply. He realized that silence was not emptiness, it was space for truth to enter. Just then, Lakhmi entered the room. She had walked in slowly, her steps steady, her presence calm. She looked at the two men and saw their faces carrying unspoken struggles. "Do not let the silence frighten you," she said gently. "Silence is where the heart speaks loudest. If you learn to hear it, you will never lose your way." The moment hung in the air like a fragile thread. Sundar felt his throat tighten, and Satya looked away to hide the sudden emotion in his eyes. They were men who had been praised as strong leaders, yet in front of this quiet woman, they felt like children again, children who were reminded of the simple truths that power often hides. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the quiet lessons being shared inside those walls. But within that space, something was happening. A seed had been planted, a seed of humility, of resilience, of respect, of kindness. Neither Sundar nor Satya knew how far these words would travel, but both knew this: their lives would never be the same again. The unseen test the following day brought with it an unexpected turn. Sundar and Satya were scheduled to meet with young entrepreneurs in a small hall not far from the city center. The event was meant to be casual, a simple exchange of ideas. But beneath the surface, both men carried the quiet lessons from Lakhmi's words. As they entered the hall, applause greeted them. The young faces were filled with admiration. almost reverence. Many of them looked at Sundar and Satya as if they were giants who had never stumbled. But Sundar felt uneasy. He knew too well the struggles hidden behind every success story. The first question came from a young woman in the front row. Her voice shook slightly, but her eyes held strength. "Sir, how do you stay true to yourself when the world expects you to be something else?" The room grew still. Sundar's heart tightened. He thought of his own journey, the moments when he had bent under pressure, when he had wondered if he was losing the values his mother taught him. He looked at the young woman and spoke with honesty. "You will always feel the world asking you to be louder, faster, bigger. But the truth is, you do not have to fight to be seen. If you carry respect and humility, the right people will see you. Do not trade your values for applause." The room remained silent, not out of doubt, but out of recognition. They were hearing not just a CEO, but a man who remembered his roots. Satya added his own voice. "Sometimes you will fail. Sometimes people will not understand your kindness. They may mistake it for weakness. But you must continue. Because kindness is never weakness. It is the deepest form of strength." As the words fell into the quiet hall, Sundar noticed his mother sitting in the back, listening carefully. She had not come forward, but her presence was like a steady flame. It reminded him that every answer he gave, every choice he made, was not only his, it was connected to those who had shaped him. Then came the test. Another young man stood up. His tone was sharper, his eyes questioning. "But, sir, if kindness is so important, why do we see leaders being ruthless and still winning? Does kindness really work in this world?" The question struck like an arrow. The room waited, tension building. Sundar looked at Satya, unsure for a moment, but before either of them could answer, Lakhmi slowly rose from her seat. The hall quieted, all eyes turning toward her. Her voice was calm, yet it cut through the air. "Winning is not the same as living with peace. Some people climb high but cannot sleep at night. Some gain power but lose respect in the eyes of their own children. True success is not measured by how many fear you, but by how many trust you. Kindness is not about winning faster. It is about building something that will last when applause fades." The young man lowered his gaze, unable to argue. The room remained in silence, but this time it was not heavy. It was a silence filled with reflection. Sundar felt his chest swell with emotion. His mother had once again spoken words that even the most powerful leaders could not deny. Satya leaned back, a faint smile on his lips, humbled by the wisdom that seemed so simple yet carried such depth. When the event ended, many young people left with a new kind of hope. They had not only heard from leaders they admired, but had witnessed a quiet exchange that was stronger than any business strategy. Sundar walked beside his mother afterward, his steps slower than usual. "Amma," he whispered, "sometimes I feel unworthy of these lessons. I fear I cannot always live up to them." She placed her hand on his arm. "My son, worth is not proven in one day. It is proven in how you rise after every fall. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to remember who you are." Satya walked behind them, listening, and he felt his own heart shift. It was not just Sundar's story anymore. It was his story, too. The shadow of doubt. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but inside, both Sundar and Satya carried storms of thought. The lessons from Lakhmi's words had shaken something deep inside them, but with those lessons also came doubt. Sundar sat late into the night in his room, the city lights stretching far beneath him. He thought of the weight of leadership, of the millions of lives touched by the smallest decision he made. He feared he might fail his mother's faith in him. Her words were clear, yet life often forced choices that seemed to betray kindness. He whispered to himself, Can I truly hold on to humility in a world that rewards pride? Satya faced his own shadows. Though admired by many, he often wondered if people respected him for who he was, or only for the position he held. He remembered times when his efforts at compassion were overlooked, even mocked. He carried the quiet pain of knowing that kindness was often seen as weakness in boardrooms filled with ambition. On one evening, they met again, this time in a small courtyard where the air was still and the stars could be seen above. Lakhmi was already there, seated calmly as if waiting for them. Her presence felt like a shelter in the middle of their doubts. Sundar spoke first. His voice trembled with honesty. Amma, I try to lead with respect, but sometimes I feel lost. People expect me to be strong, but their idea of strength feels so far from kindness. I fear I may lose myself. Satya lowered his gaze and added quietly, I feel the same. I want to lead with empathy, but the world often asks for ruthlessness. Sometimes I wonder if we are just fooling ourselves. Lakhmi listened without interruption, her eyes steady. Then she spoke, her words slow but filled with weight. Strength is not the absence of doubt, my sons. Strength is walking with doubt and still choosing kindness. Do not mistake the noise of the world for truth. The world often praises what shines on the outside, but true respect grows in silence, in places unseen. The men sat in silence, her words pressing deep into their hearts. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice softer. Let me tell you something. When Sundar was a boy, we often could not afford what others had. He once came to me and said, Amma, maybe I should not dream so high. And I told him, your dreams are not measured by our wealth. They are measured by your heart. Today he stands here because he chose to believe not in wealth, but in resilience. Satya, your journey is no different. You both are proof that humility and perseverance can build what power alone cannot. Satya's eyes stung with unshed tears. Sundar looked away, his chest heavy. Just then, a small child approached the courtyard. She was the daughter of one of the staff members. She held a broken toy in her hands and looked up shyly. Can you help me fix this? She asked softly. The moment felt almost unreal. Sundar took the toy in his hands, examining it carefully, while Satya bent down to comfort the girl. Together, they worked to mend it, their powerful titles forgotten in the simple act of kindness. Lakhmi watched, her lips curved in a faint smile. This is strength, she whispered. To bend down, to give your time, to heal what is broken. Remember this always. The child left with a smile, and the courtyard returned to silence. But for Sundar and Satya, that small moment carried more meaning than any award, any title, any stage. As they looked at each other, both men felt something shift inside. They realized that kindness was not just an idea, it was a choice made in small, quiet moments, again and again. The storm within a week later, Sundar and Satya were invited to a global forum where leaders from across the world had gathered. The event was filled with grandeur, bright lights, cameras, applause, and carefully planned speeches. It was the kind of place where every word was measured, every gesture judged. Yet both men carried with them the quiet lessons from Lakhmi's voice. As they sat together on stage, questions from journalists and panelists came one after another. Many were about innovation, strategy, and competition. Sundar answered with his usual calmness, while Satya spoke with balance and clarity. But inside, a storm was rising. One journalist suddenly asked, in this world of competition, do you believe kindness has a place in leadership? Or is it simply an illusion? The audience leaned in, waiting. Some smiled, expecting a polished response. Others crossed their arms, ready to challenge. Sundar hesitated. He thought of his mother, her soft voice reminding him that true leadership carried the hopes of those who could not speak. Satya felt the weight, too. He could sense the doubt in the room, the unspoken belief that kindness had no power in the world of power. Sundar leaned toward the microphone. His voice was steady yet filled with something raw. Kindness is not an illusion. It is the foundation. When I was young, my family had little. But my mother taught me that dignity and respect were more valuable than wealth. Today, if I stand here, it is because those lessons guided me. Without kindness, leadership is empty. It may shine for a while, but it leaves nothing behind. The hall grew silent. People expected numbers, strategies, grand visions, but what they heard was something human. Satya then added, "I have learned that empathy is not weakness. It is the strength that allows us to see beyond ourselves. If leaders choose ruthlessness, they may win for a time. But leaders who choose kindness will inspire others to rise, and that is how true progress is made." There was a pause before applause broke out, not the usual applause of politeness, but a deeper one. Some stood, clapping with emotion, while others remained seated, still processing the weight of what had just been said. Behind the stage, Sundar's eyes searched the crowd until he found his mother sitting quietly, her face calm. Her presence reminded him that he had not spoken for himself, but for the truth she had planted in him long ago. But even as the applause echoed, doubt crept back. When the session ended, a fellow leader approached Sundar and whispered with a smirk, "Kindness sounds nice, but it won't keep you at the top." The words pierced him like a blade. For a moment, his confidence wavered. He wondered if the world truly wanted the values his mother had taught him, or if it demanded something colder. Satya noticed the shadow pass over his face. Later, when they were alone, Satya said softly, "Don't let their words break you. Sometimes the world mocks what it secretly longs for." That night, in the quiet of his room, Sundar replayed the words spoken on stage and the doubts thrown at him afterward. He felt the storm within, pride battling humility, fear fighting with faith. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Amma, am I strong enough for this path?" In another part of the city, Lakhmi prayed quietly for her son and for Satya. She knew storms would come, but she also knew storms test the roots of a tree. Only deep roots could survive. The next morning, Sundar and Satya met again. Their faces carried the weight of sleepless nights, but their voices were steady. They both knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Yet in the midst of doubt, they had begun to understand something vital. Storms do not destroy those who remember where their strength comes from. The breaking point days turned into weeks, and the quiet lessons from Lakhmi's words were tested again and again. Sundar found himself in endless meetings, where voices around him pushed for speed, profit, and dominance. He often sat silently, remembering his mother's advice, but the pressure to give in to pride grew stronger each day. One late evening, he sat in his office, staring at a proposal that promised massive growth but demanded harsh decisions, layoffs, cutbacks, and choices that would leave many lives shaken. His heart felt heavy. He whispered to himself, "Is this what leadership means? To climb higher by pushing others down?" His hands trembled. He wanted to refuse, yet he knew the board expected results. At the same time, Satya faced his own breaking point. A major crisis hit his company. An error in a product release had caused setbacks, and competitors rushed to take advantage. Advisors urged him to act aggressively, to shift blame, to protect the company's image at any cost. But Satya felt torn. The easy path was to cover mistakes and move on. Yet something inside him resisted. It was during this storm that both men decided to meet again. They found themselves in the same quiet courtyard where Lakhmi often sat waiting. The night air was cool and the stars above felt like distant witnesses to their struggles. Sundar broke the silence first. Satya, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Every choice feels like betrayal. I'm asked to choose between growth and humanity, and I don't know which path is right. Satya lowered his head. I feel the same. The world is watching, and everyone expects me to act like a ruthless leader. But I cannot ignore the voices of those who will suffer if I do. Lakhmi listened, her eyes calm but filled with compassion. Then she said softly, Every tree bends in the storm, but the tree that remembers its roots does not break. You both are bending now, but you must not let the storm decide who you are. Leadership is not about escaping the storm. It is about standing in it with dignity. Sundar looked at her, his eyes filled with unshed tears. But Amma, what if I fail? What if kindness costs me everything? She placed her hand gently over his. My son, failure is not losing your position. Failure is forgetting your humanity. If kindness costs you power, then let it. For power will fade, but respect will remain. Satya closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Her words struck something deep within him. He thought of the thousands of employees who trusted his choices, the families who relied on his decisions. Suddenly, the noise of ambition around him seemed small compared to the quiet truth of her voice. Then came a moment neither of them expected. Lakhmi leaned back and shared something she had never spoken before. When I was young, I too faced a storm. I was told that my children would never rise, that we had nothing to offer the world. But I chose to believe otherwise. I chose resilience, and look where you are now. Do not forget, your strength comes not from the titles you hold, but from the humility you carry. The courtyard fell silent. The men sat with bowed heads, humbled by her revelation. Just then, a sudden gust of wind blew through the courtyard, rustling the trees. It felt almost symbolic, as if the world itself was listening. Sundar and Satya looked at each other, and for the first time they both felt a quiet certainty. They might bend under pressure, but they would not break. The light that remains the days after the breaking point were different. Sundar and Satya carried the same responsibilities, the same pressures, but something inside them had shifted. They no longer looked at leadership as a battle to win, but as a path to walk with dignity. Sundar returned to the proposal that had once shaken him. He read every line, every demand, and instead of signing without thought, he made changes. He refused to choose growth at the cost of people's dignity. His advisors warned him of risks, of slower profits, of criticism from those who expected more aggression. But Sundar stood firm. He remembered his mother's words. Failure was not in losing power, but in forgetting humanity. Satya too faced his crisis. Instead of covering mistakes or shifting blame, he spoke openly. He addressed his employees with honesty, admitting where things went wrong and promising to fix them together. At first, some doubted him, but slowly, his truth inspired trust. His choice to face the storm with humility became a moment that many would remember for years. Their decisions did not go unnoticed. Some critics mocked them, some competitors called them naive, but many ordinary people saw something else, a new kind of strength. Articles were written, stories were shared, and slowly, whispers turned into inspiration. People spoke not just about their success in business, but about their courage to remain human in a world that often forgot kindness. One evening, the three of them sat together again, Sundar, Satya, and Lakhmi. There were no cameras, no speeches, just a quiet moment under the same sky where many of their lessons had been spoken. Lakhmi looked at her son, then at Satya, and said, "The world will remember your titles for a short time, but it will remember your kindness for generations. What you build with respect will last longer than what you build with fear." Sundar felt tears rise in his eyes. He thought of the young boy he once was, the one who doubted his dreams and how far he had come because of his mother's simple truths. Satya, too, felt moved, realizing that his own journey was now tied to these lessons he would carry forward. Then something unexpected happened. A young employee, who had quietly followed their story, stood before them. His voice was shy but firm. "Sir, ma'am, your words have changed the way I see my life. I used to think only power mattered, but now I believe kindness can guide me too. I want to live by the same values you've shown." Lakhmi's eyes softened. She reached out her hand and placed it gently on his shoulder. "Then the circle is complete," she said. "The lesson has moved from me to my son to his friend, and now to you. This is how kindness spreads. It does not end with one person. It begins with them." The air grew still, yet full of warmth. Sundar and Satya looked at each other, both understanding that this was the true measure of success. Not wealth, not recognition, but the spark of inspiration passed on to others. As the night grew darker, they sat together in silence, but it was no longer the silence of doubt. It was the silence of peace, of understanding, of strength. The quiet exchange that began with simple words had now become a story that would inspire millions. It was not about leaders or titles, but about humanity, resilience, humility, and kindness.